Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my 2022 BookTube Prize Octafinals Ranking video. I've been so excited. Of course, I've had this on my mind, at least for the past 2 months, as I have been reading the Octafinals for Fiction Group E. I was very surprised to get fiction for the Octafinals. I assumed because I also signed up to do nonfiction that that's what I would get. It's what I've gotten in years past as I've been a judge for the BookTube Prize. I know that nonfiction isn't always the most popular group, but I am so excited that I got to have my team fiction bonafides this year to start things off with. Anyway, I'm already rambling. I should stop rambling here. I have a long script ahead of me. And before I even do that, I'll give a brief synopsis of the BookTube Prize. The prize was started in 2019 by Robert at Barter Hordes. His intention was to judge the best in books that were published in the US the year before. This year we have three divisions: fiction, literary fiction, nonfiction, and translated fiction. We have 350 judges who judged this round from loads of countries across the globe. I'm so excited that I hope my fellow judges will be, uploading videos to talk about their rankings, because that's always one of the most fun parts of the end of each round, is finally being able to talk about it. Because I can say that the three books I voted in my group to advance to the quarterfinals are the three books that did advance to the quarterfinals, and that's very exciting. But that being said, I've never found a video or thoughts from another judge in my previous groups who believe exactly the way I believe. We all come to books differently. It's all very fascinating, I think is the word. Anyway, I'll link to more BookTube Prize information down below, including Robert's official announcement video about all of the books that advanced from the Octafinals into the quarterfinals. And without further ado, I am going to go into my own ranking and reviews of these 6 books I read for the Octafinals this year, starting with my least favorite book, which I've ranked as number 6, and ending with my most favorite at number 1. Though, as always for me, I am largely positive about all of the books that I read. I had a really good time. Okay, starting at number 6, I have Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. This is a near-future novel told from the perspective of an artificial friend or, an android. She starts her life in a shop and then ultimately is bought to be the companion of a young girl named Josie. Josie is sick, and it slowly becomes apparent that her parents, or at least her mother, might want Clara around for more reasons than just to be a companion. But really, this isn't an ominous sort of novel. It's about Clara's devotion to Josie and her family, and the family's devotion to each other, and how Clara decides to use the sun to try and save Josie's life. It's a small and hopeful novel that would speak to people who don't like flashier and more action-packed sci-fi. I am a science fiction fan, and I do not like too much flash and action-packedness. But on the opposite side of the coin, the lack of world building with regards to these new social realities made the premise shallow. At one point, the father goes on a xenophobic rant, and without any context, it just seems gratuitous. But the bigger problem to me is that Clara isn't really a character. I mean, she isn't human. She has no sense of self. She is an abnegation machine, to be discarded at the end of the narrative. I know that there's science fiction out there that delves into robotics and consciousness, but this doesn't really do either. It's supposed to be a character study, when the main character isn't a three-dimensional character. So it fell flat for me. In number 5, I put The Chosen and the Beautiful by Nevo. This is one of the earliest Great Gatsby retellings ever since the novel went into the public domain, and I think it's still one of the best received. It takes place in 1920s New York, like the original novel, and it features more or less the original characters. Jordan Baker, who is Daisy's best friend and Nick's beau, narrates the story. But in this telling, Jordan is a Vietnamese adoptee, and the glittery magic of the setting is literal. Many of the plot lines and even the dialogue of the original remains. But Jordan is also dealing with such things as the passing of the Manchester Act, which might force her, with her Asian descent, out of the city. So, a slightly different brand of social criticism. Also, this Jordan provides a much more critical eye to Gatsby's obsession with Daisy. Jordan and Daisy's past is richly explored, magical and otherwise, and there's a definite sense of wonder to the prose. But I found myself wanting the speculative elements to be more contained to Gatsby's Hellmouth house, literal Hellmouth that is, because once it went everywhere, it lost its sense of potency. Also, small, unrelated quibble here, but Jordan was an athlete in name only, just saying. Missed a subplot there, I think. I also think that as a protagonist, this Jordan didn't grow and change as much as Nick did in the original. At the end of the day, maybe there still is a little more shine than substance to this book. And that's the sort of thing the original was trying to critique. In my number 4 spot, I have Burnt Sugar by Avni Doshi. I'm definitely feeling the familiar BookTube prize indecision here about whether or not I'm okay with this book being below the cut, or if I would have liked to nominate it to advance to the quarterfinals. Why can't we have a tie? Kidding, of course. Before I make Robert's life even more of a tangled mess, here's what this book is about. Our narrator, Antara, is reliving her tumultuous formative years as her tumultuous mother, Tara, gets an Alzheimer's diagnosis. This story probes the bonds of filial duty, when an arguably maternal duty was breached in the past. Tara was often an abusive mother. Antara, as an adult, can be caustic and unlikable. And there's a pretty even divide between professional reviewers who enjoyed this story and Goodreads reviewers who not so much. I was very taken with the relationships, particularly how they showed a different psychological reality than I was used to seeing in Indian fiction. And yet I think the novel was too short. Some of Antara's personal shifts at the end felt a little abrupt. And I was always hoping for some more development between her and her American-born husband, Dilip. Alas, still, overall, it was a very moving read. Okay, above the cut now, starting with number 3, in which I put Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. In terms of length and content, we are at the opposite side of the scale, I think, than Burnt Sugar. Ostensibly, this book is about a female aviator, Marion, who in the early 1950s is lost as she flies over the North and South Pole in a historic flight. But it's also about the actress Hadley, who plays her in a biopic several decades later. And it's about Marion's formative years and young adult life, starting even before she was conceived, and introducing people who would later become important to her story. This is where the novel lost me a little bit. It was difficult to get invested when there were all of these random characters. After a while, though, the fast-paced chapters and intriguing action kind of took over. Including, for me, Hadley's story, even though it's primarily seen as the lesser storyline. But there was something rewarding in her contained little narrative, versus Marion's, who kind of went all over the place. And yet that was kind of sort of the point. The main question this novel seems to be asking is, can art accurately distill the life of a person? We start with this inspiring and unusual woman who broke barriers and has a mysterious end to her life. A novelist does some research and writes a tidy little book about her. Then some movie folks want to crack the case, though much of Hadley's reportage sticks to the producers and their concessions to Hollywood storytelling. Meanwhile, we as an audience learn that Marion's relationships and desires are far more complicated than anyone believes. But it's kind of a cheat too, since Marion herself is a work of fiction. And Maggie Shipstead is playing God. I don't know, I had a couple of problems with the fourth wall here. But overall, I was very impressed by all of the research and the questioning. In my number 2 spot, I have The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois by Honoré Fanon Jeffers. This is probably the most ambitious book on the list and certainly the longest. It spans 200 years in the life of a family in a town in what's now known as Georgia. Ailey Garfield is ostensibly our main character. We follow her as she starts to relate to her family as a child and carries a traumatizing secret. She attends a predominantly white private high school and then a predominantly black college. And she ultimately comes to terms with her family's legacy by pursuing a master's degree in history. Interstitial chapters called songs, with lyrical storytelling, speak of her ancestors, starting when white plantation owners steal the land from the Creek indigenous peoples, and blacks are brought in as slaves. We also get some insight into Ailey's mother and older sister in a couple of sections. The narrative is generally in conversation with the writings of W.E.B. Du Bois, who, among other things, advocated for the talented 10th to carry the race into the future. Jeffers painted a more complicated picture of the black experience, which took into account such things as colorism, sexual abuse, and the living nature of history. Ailey's mother's family continues to live in their hometown amidst ghosts, these ghosts sometimes being deftly witnessed by characters in the present. As an American, it's a book worth reading for its complicated and challenging grappling with our legacies of racism and oppression. I do think some of the 800 pages could be a little indulgent, and maybe even heavy-handed. But the ultimate image I take away is one of a thriving and fully realized black family, and particularly it's led by compelling black women. It is quite the feat. And finally, in my number 1 spot, I have The 5 Wounds by Kirsten Valdez Quaid. I feel like this is the testament that I prefer approachable and readable books to ones that technically might take more risks. This feels like the kind of novel you could sit your book club down to. One timeline, few characters, pretty straightforward plot. And yet, just underneath, there is a deep and thoughtful story about the life of a Latinx family, their stumbling blocks, and their ways of righting themselves and moving forward. Arguably, the main character is 33-year-old Amadeo, who starts the novel with a performative miracle and then ends it with a real one. The inciting incident is his 15-year-old pregnant daughter, Angel, coming to live with him, or technically coming to live with her grandmother, who he lives with, after she has a fight with her own mother. And meanwhile, the family matriarch, Yolanda, alternates between being the glue that holds her descendants together and struggling under the weight of a new and devastating diagnosis. The premise hints to Angel and Amadeo being little more than screw-ups, but instead Quaid makes them into complicated characters who, despite their flaws, struggle and strive for a better future. Redemption is the name of the game here, especially with all of the Jesus references. But Quaid handles it deftly rather than with a sledgehammer. The setting is also a visceral place, a small town in New Mexico, where the family, the Padillas, have lived since before the founding of the United States, again with a nod to the legacy of colonialism. There's a lot of social issues at play, like poverty, drug addiction, abuse, lack of education. An outside pseudo-social worker, pseudo-teacher, named Bianca, shows some of the limits of white liberal empathy, though I think her plot stumbled a little bit when she briefly got involved with Amadeo. That didn't quite ring true to me. But at least she had dimensions, making this book into a pleasing mix of strong characters, strong plot, strong themes, and, I think, a strong appeal to a wide swath of readers. I guess I'll wait and see if The 5 Wounds makes it out of the quarterfinals, but if I'm sitting here making predictions, I guess I'll go ahead and say, much like I predicted with Cast last year, I think The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois will be in the finals somewhere. So I'll definitely be on lookout. But that about covers it for me now. You can find the Goodreads links to all of these reviews linked down below now that I've finally been able to officially post them. Oh boy, part of me can't believe that we're already through all of March and the Octafinals are over and we're now into the quarterfinals. And I am indeed judging the quarterfinals. And this time I have moved back to nonfiction. So in my next video, I will be discussing my preliminary thoughts on my new ballot before I start reading them. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, I hope all of my fellow judges had as much fun with this project so far as I have, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about what you were reading. So yeah, thank you again, Robert, for the amazing amount of work that you do on this project year after year. This is such a great community to be a part of. And I'm already looking forward to the end of the quarterfinals to see what's next. But in the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone. And I'll see you next time.